because they usually are here. So maybe they messed up. I don't know. We'll just have to see. So anyway, hopefully people will get here. I know it's a little harder to get moving on that Sunday. I know I sat here by myself a little longer this morning than normal on Sunday mornings. You know, you always have that little bit of time when you're here by yourself and you've unlocked the building and the lights are all on. And you're kind of like, okay, you know, people are going to come. Well, they eventually do. So. I preached the pews. I preached to some empty pews before. Not entirely empty pews, but there have been some empty pews before. Okay, it is good to see everybody this morning on this beautiful Sunday morning. I've asked Jim Hall to lead us in prayer before we start in the class, and if he would do that at this time, we'll bow our heads.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the health and well-being and the willingness we have with this group here to be here today to come and study, put efforts into worship as you ask us to, God, to give glory to you and uplift each other. We always ask you to be with all those who are sick physically, those sick spiritually, those mourning the loss of loved ones. We know many that are doing that at this time. We pray that we'll do our job in taking care of all those group of people, that reach out to them and be their Christian support of them, dear Heavenly Father. Thank you for our teachers. Thank you for participation in our classes and the whole system we have here to bring up our young children and older alike, dear Heavenly Father, so that we can continue to grow your word, your understanding, your knowledge, dear God. God, I thank you most importantly for your Son Jesus. Thank you for his love and sacrifice for us. Thank you for your grace, your love, your mercy, and your forgiveness. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, we're in chapters 5 and 6 today of Proverbs. Chapters 5 and 6. The continuation, now, outlines out on the podium, it's 2 pages, but it's the outlines for chapters 5 and 6. They're out there. So they're on the podium. So if you want to get those on the way out, you can. But looking at chapters 5 and 6, we have, starting in verse 1, in chapter 5, you have a continuation of the idea that you have of a father talking to a son. Keeping in mind this is Solomon that is the author and writing to a son. I don't know that necessarily it's Rehoboam that this is written to. I think it's any of his sons. And then also broader scope, I think it's written to anybody that would read this. Intentional. But yet the perspective is a father to a son. And today in particular, he talks especially a good amount about the folly of and the sin of adultery and why to stay away from that. And of course, he gives some of those things in that. Also, you have the furtherance of the idea of following wisdom and staying away from evil and all those things. Some of this is repetition, like we've said. There's a lot of repetition in the book of Proverbs, but he dives a little deeper in some of those things today. Starting in verse 1, chapter 5. My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. Their speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. You know, usually we think of the two-edged sword as what it says in Hebrews 4:12, about the word of God being sharper than a two-edged sword. Here an adulteress is compared to that. It is an interesting image that she is given such power in that. Verse 5, her feet go down to death, her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life, her ways wander, and she does not know it. And now, O sons, listen to me. Do not part from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Do not go near the door to her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go down to the house of a foreigner. And at the end of your life you groan when your flesh and body are consumed. And you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, or incline my ear to instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. Drink water from your own cistern, flow water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. All of that chapter, and I went ahead and read it all together, is all on that same subject of Solomon warning his son to stay away from adultery, in particular, to stay away from the adulterous woman, or any adulterous woman. Now, of course, he says, don't even go by her house. And I don't see that he's talking about any specific person, but just simply any situation like that. And you think, why? Of course, certainly that is a sin, the same as any other sin, adultery and committing that. But Solomon knew how destructive that could be. You see, Solomon's mother was named Bathsheba. Oh yeah, that Bathsheba. And his father was David. Solomon was the second son of David and Bathsheba. The first one died. Remember why the first one died? Because Nathan the prophet said the son that Bathsheba is going to have is going to die. In 2 Samuel 12 is when Nathan confronts David about the sin of adultery that he and Bathsheba had committed, and how that he had had Uriah killed, and how that he was going to be forgiven of that, but there were going to be consequences. Consequences being that the child that they conceived was going to die, and that no end of trouble was going to happen in his house, and that he would be constantly fighting against even his own household and his nation. And he is told that one of his own sons is going to drive him out of his kingdom and is going to threaten his life. And that happens with Absalom. In the process of the wars that resulted from David doing this, he has a son, Absalom, that dies. He has another son, Amnon, that rapes a sister of his, Tamar. And then Absalom kills Amnon. He has two sons die, a daughter that is raped, and thousands of his nation are killed in wars and quote-unquote skirmishes that result because of punishment due to his sin. A whole lot of people's lives get wrecked because of David looked out, saw Bathsheba, and acted upon what he did. A massive amount of collateral damage happened because of David and Bathsheba's adultery. Many people in the world will say, it's my life, it's my body, I'll do whatever I want. Well, that all might seem good, But people never do their actions in a vacuum. Even when people apply that to drugs. You know, if a person is hooked on drugs, it doesn't affect just them. It's everybody that cares about them, everybody that knows them, everybody that works with them, everybody that drives up and down the road with them. So many other people are have collateral effects due to the situation that someone has put themselves in. No one lives their life in a total vacuum in which they do not influence others or do not have some impact on other people's lives. And so no one can really say, I'm not hurting anybody else. And it is no more ridiculous when it is said that way about adultery. There is damage made on many, many levels. There is one, if not two, marriages damaged by adultery. And then there are children, there are family members, there are friends, there are others that are betrayed. Solomon knows all too well about the damage that was done to his family and what he saw in that because of that. And so many times, that sin in particular has such far-reaching implications on other people's lives. And so, I know that anybody that's been around a while has seen that happen and seen how the residual effects and the collateral damage happen not only between the two people that are involved in that and the immediate families that they're connected with, but there are many others that get harmed in the process. And certainly, that is the case. And that's why not only do people need to stay away from that for themselves and their situation, but all the residual collateral damage that takes place in other people's lives all the way through. And so, that is such a terrible thing that can happen, and it is certainly a damaging and deadly thing upon souls. Certainly, we look at it from that standpoint. We can see that Solomon is warning very much. As you go down that path with the adulterous woman, there is destruction. There is not life. And those that go down to that path do not. They groan. Their flesh and body are consumed. He doesn't come out and say it, but it almost seems like he's talking about some STDs, some diseases brought about by illicit sexual behavior. Some of those things have been around a long time. AIDS is a more relatively new thing in the course of human history, but things like syphilis has killed millions of people over the course of human history. In fact, killed many, many people during the Middle Ages and earlier times. And so certainly an individual that came in contact with a lot of people sexually, like an adulteress or a prostitute, then certainly those things would have been in that society and certainly been a possibility for that. Not to mention the spiritual damage that does to one's soul in that situation. So, he emphasizes in this, toward the second half of the chapter, to find pleasure in your own wife. He uses such language as drink from your own cistern. Find joy in the wife of your youth. Uses some of the poetic language that you find in Song of Solomon. Refers to the wife as a lovely deer, a graceful doe. And talks about taking delight in her breasts, being intoxicated in her love. Very much the same kind of thing said in Song of Solomon. And that in opposition to being engaged in activity with an adulteress. And so, makes it very clear what he is talking about. And at each point in this chapter, you think, okay, is he still talking about adultery? And then he comes back around to it and say, yep, that's what he's talking about. And so brings that out, and you have that understanding. So he also emphasizes in the last couple verses that the iniquities of the wicked ensnare him. Those things trip him up, trap him, catch him. He's held fast in the cords of sin, and he dies due to lack of discipline, and he has caused great folly and is led astray. Just a simple commentary. There's probably been nothing in human history that has been the downfall of more men than women and women-related things. Probably the only thing that would rival it is money and power. Money and power probably are up there, but an improper relationship or improper situation with women is a big, big problem for so many. And, David was a great man for many, many reasons. David is quite possible, is definitely one of the greatest human leaders ever. But how long do you have to think about David before you think about the sin of Bathsheba? When you mention King David, you think of Goliath and you think of Bathsheba pretty quickly in that. And so David did a lot of amazing things. And David in the book of Acts is called a man after God's own heart. David wrote the Psalms. David walked with God and was a righteous and really good man for probably 99% of his life. Oh, but we all remember that little part, that little stretch, that little window of a few months that he committed adultery with Bathsheba, had Uriah killed, and was trying to cover it up. That little slice of his life doesn't take long before you remember that. And I think that just goes to show how impactful that sin is, and how impactful that can be upon our awareness and consciousness. Now, David was forgiven of it, and certainly there is grace and mercy and forgiveness for anybody that wants it and anybody that seeks it with that sin, same as any other sin. But there are very few sins in humanity that cause more damage than that. Any questions or comments in that?
David had several wives. Abigail was smart, rich, good looking. But if David hadn't done this, we wouldn't have had Solomon.
Yeah. There was good that was brought out of it. It's not a matter of ends justifying means. But yeah, there could be there can be good things that come about as a result. And of course, Solomon, being a child of Bathsheba and David, is one of those.
Just makes you wonder.
Right. It's also a good example, Ted, of why we can't look back and say, if we don't have done things differently. Well, we can't do things differently. We can't go back. We've got to move forward. And so those mistakes or whatever it is in our past or in Solomon's life or David's life, they're done. Can't go back and erase it. But you can move forward and learn from it because of what you've gone through. And so that is very much an important thing. So no matter what anybody has done or where anybody is, it's important that they do rely on the grace and mercy of God and move forward with them.
So I think Solomon's telling us that we are all tempted. The thing is that there are certain temptations that we should avoid.
Oh yeah.
And Christ was tempted. Paul tells Timothy to avoid lusting during your youth or youthful lust.
Right, and he told Timothy straight up to treat younger women as sisters. And so he addressed how he should treat younger women. He said treat older women as mothers, treat younger women as sisters. And so there was guidance there. He didn't come out and spell it out, but in treating someone like a sister, it is implied that you're not going to treat them like a love interest or anything like that. And so there is a good example of how we should treat other people. And so, I don't want to open it up to politics. This is not political. But one thing I appreciate very much about our vice president is that when he was put on the spotlight, he made it very plain that he does not ever sit down with a woman without someone else being present. And he caught a lot of heat for that. I'm like, but that's a great idea. I mean, I try to follow that. I mean, I definitely do that. If I've got any woman within 20, 30 years of my age that wants to sit down with me and talk, there's going to be some ground rules. And one of those being that, Amy might not be in the room with us, but she's going to be here at the church building if we're going to sit down and talk. So that there's no illusions of anything. We're going to do that. I mean, she doesn't have to be in the conversation, and that's fine if it's a private conversation. But we're not going to do that if she's not around, at least somewhere, to where it's clear what's being done and what's out there. I'm not gonna get myself in that situation because so much can happen. And if you just have a policy like that and don't break that, well, then that saves so much. It saves the appearance of anything. It shows that you're above board, and so it makes a big, big difference. And it's a way to be careful of this. And so what's mind-blowing to me is that more men shouldn't do that. Because you know what? If Bill Clinton had that policy, things might have been different. And others, think about all the issues. And like I said, I don't want to open up political. That's not my point of that. But very publicly, that was said about the vice president. Now, I don't think Donald Trump has that policy, but we're not going to talk about that. But our vice president does. And I think that's a very admirable thing, that to make it clear that you're not going to find a bunch of skeletons tumble out of the closet, because this is a man that has lived his life above board. And hey, that's an important thing. That's a good thing. And so that's something to be admired. And don't put yourself in those situations. I remember very well, a preacher said to me, he says, you know what? He said it in sermons, so it wasn't just specifically to me, that, you know what? The reason why I don't trust teenagers in the back seat of a car alone on a dark road is I don't trust myself in the back seat of a car with a teenager alone on a dark road. And you know what? That's true. And when I talk to young people, you don't make your decision in the back seat of a car all alone to stay a virgin. You make that decision when you're not in the back seat of a car alone, so that you don't get in the back seat of a car alone on a deserted road. You don't put yourself there. Because, a young person, 15 to 25 years old with their hormones raging, and God designed us to be that way, we put ourselves in that kind of situation. People with the most self-control you'll ever find would likely cave in a situation like that. So why would you do that? A lot of times the people that have the least amount of self-control based upon their age and experience are the ones that put themselves in the most difficult and damaging situations. And so the best thing to do is never be in that situation. Never put yourself there. And certainly if we can avoid that, it saves so much. Don't put yourself in a compromising situation, and you will be less likely to be compromised. And so that is such an important thing. Like I said with this chapter, it emphasizes to us so much the damage that can be caused if we find ourselves in that place.
Clinton, I heard it one time, and I'll never forget this, and this is certainly no discredit to any woman at all, but, you know, Solomon, especially during the Song of Solomon, he talks about love being, there can be a natural love, but there can be a better love, which is a spiritual or a holy love. I heard Lenny Santee one time preach from the pulpit. He said, I would commit adultery in a second if there was a woman worth me losing my soul over. And so he said, I'll never have to worry about committing adultery.
Well, if there's a woman worth losing your soul over. Well,
And to him, there wasn't, so.
well, and that's true. There's nobody really worth such a thing to do. And so, yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting perspective on it.
You ever wonder what Bathsheba might have to say about David? You ever wonder what Solomon's wives might have to say about him?
Oh, yeah.
We don't get that perspective.
Right. Yeah, we don't get the perspective. We don't know anything about what Bathsheba said. We don't know anything about what Bathsheba's family said. You know, wouldn't we like to have interviewed Uriah? You know, his nation. I mean, you know, you talk about political scandals. I mean, that's up there with political scandals in human history. And certainly, yeah, there's a massive amount of damage that was caused because David stayed behind, didn't go out with his soldiers to battle, and he looked out and he saw what he liked and he did everything he could to get it. And all of those things led to his spiritual demise in that circumstance. And so there are lessons that we should learn in all of that we stay away from that sin as much as possible. Jim?
You know, I find it so comforting to know that God knew this went on from the dawn of time. This is essentially David in a situation on Facebook reuniting with his high school sweetheart. If he would have not stayed on that road and walked away, that would have happened. Nothing has changed. It was
Right.
That's why it's so stressed now, all the examples of it.
Right.
Because it was exactly the same way then.
Right.
Now we just are unfortunate that we can see it every channel we turn on. News-wise, it's published.
Right.
It's no different. And it just, the Bible, God stresses it to us. He didn't have to put these terrible examples of what happens in life, but he did it for a purpose.
Right.
Because he knew the being that he created morally could falter in many ways. It comforts me knowing that.
Not
Because
only that, he put it
you
in
just
the
make mistakes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, God has always been real when it comes to what he writes in the Bible. Bible is real life. And with what Jim's saying, it's comforting to know that the things we struggle with today aren't necessarily new. He used the example, I think it's a very good one, that a lot of times people today, the modern way that, the modern way that people find each other is online. The modern way that people find adultery is very often online. And how it happens is you find a friend on Facebook and you went to high school with them and you had a flame for them and you notice they're divorced. And you send them a message and you say, how you doing? And you strike up an emotional affair and then it becomes a physical affair. That happens. That is one of the big things that's going on in our world. What Hunter said was that, that's a good point, is that David and Bathsheba is in the lineage of Christ. And you find that being real and being honest, she's not called in the lineage of Christ, but in Matthew 1, it says, the one who had formerly been the wife of Uriah. Well, we know who that is. We know that's Bathsheba. Also in the lineage of Christ is Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah that tricked Judah into thinking she was a prostitute and had Perez and Zerah as children by way of her. Then you have Ruth, the Moabite. And then you have, the other one is Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute. So there are women of questionable character throughout in the lineage of Christ. And I think part of that realism that God can work with it if we're willing to be repentant of it. And so even such a sin as adultery is not something that is necessarily ends anything, but it's something God can work through if we are repentant of it, if we seek forgiveness of it, and if we move forward away from it. But think about how much damage would not be caused if that is not engaged in. And so, very much. But that is why. And I'll tell you, ever since I got email, ever since I got Facebook, she doesn't sit down and check it often, but I've always made sure Amy had my passwords. So if she ever had any questions, she could get on my Facebook and read every private message I've had with anybody, including any of the women I have messages with. And if there's any counseling kind of things I do on Facebook Messenger, I make sure Amy's clued into that. That here's who I've been talking about this evening. I may not tell her what it's about necessarily, but this is who I've been conversing with, so that she's aware and so that there's no questions. And I'm not saying I'm the gold standard to do that by, but I'm just telling you something that will save you and them a whole lot of headache if you just keep everything above board. I always know that at any moment my wife has any opportunity she can to get into any email account, Facebook, anything I've got immediately, and can get into my phone or my iPad or my laptop and look at anything she wants because she has access to all of it. And hey, I want it that way because I want her to not be concerned about what I'm doing on there or whatever. And so it is very important for that, and important that we have that kind of understanding because, there is the potential real danger. There's real danger present if we are not careful and not diligent. And it's so important that we take delight in each other, that we enjoy our spouses and stay faithful and true to them. It is a very important thing that we do that. Because like I said, so much other damage is done if we fail at that. Any other questions or comments that are pertinent there?
Solomon seems to point out that the love that a man should have for his wife is that it makes her perfect in his sight.
Right.
And she is the only woman in the world for him.
Right.
He especially brings that out in the Song of Solomon. But it ties
Right.
perfectly with what we're studying here.
There was an Alabama song back in, I think, the early 80s. It's close enough to perfect for me. Maybe don't endorse every line of the song. But the concept is really good. She's close enough to perfect for me. And in a lot of ways, if we viewed our spouses that way, because we know the imperfections that our spouses have, and trust me, they know your imperfections. So that goes both ways. And so understanding that and recognizing that we are to be as perfect for each other as we can be, and our love for each other does that. Okay, chapter 6. We need to get going to get through it today. Chapter 6 starts out, "My son, if you have put security for your neighbor, having given your pledge for a stranger, if you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself. And you will come into the hand of your neighbor, go hasten and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, your eyelids no slumber. Save yourselves like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler." And he's talking about, about if you have, if you've borrowed something from your neighbor, or you've made an arrangement with your neighbor, and you find yourself on the wrong end of that, well, then you make sure that you make that right as soon as you possibly can, however that is, in doing that. Very much the idea of, like what Jesus said, if you're going to the altar and you realize you have something against your brother, you make it right before you get there. You take care of that. Verse 4, "Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourselves like a gazelle from the hunter, like a bird, the hand of the fowler. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider your ways and be wise. without having any chief, officer, or ruler. She prepares for bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. Who's he talking about? An ant. About the ants. They don't, they don't have a chief, an officer, or a ruler. But what's more organized than an ant-man? They're pretty amazing little creatures. In Costa Rica, there are leafcutter ants, and when we went and looked a couple different places, we saw some of them. And the leafcutter ants, they cut off tiny little pieces, but some of them they'll cut a piece of leaf about a fourth the size of a postage stamp. But when you realize the ant is so small, it's like 20 times the weight of the ant. They're the strongest creature per pound on the planet, by the way. It's just the thing that they don't weigh much. But they carry these huge pieces of leaf, and so, these leaves going down, and so they go and they find a tree that they want to cut the leaves off of, but they have grained within them that they only take approximately 20% of the leaves off of any one tree. When they get to that amount, then they go and find a different tree. They don't ever take all the leaves off a tree. You know why? The tree's going to die. But they're designed by God to only take a certain small amount of leaves off of a tree. And when they do that off of a tree, then they go to get another tree. And they do that. They don't eat the leaves, interestingly enough. So why do they cut the leaves? They take the leaves and they put them underground. And the rotting leaves produce a fungus. And they eat the fungus. But they don't eat the leaves. And so what they do is they're farming fungus. So they take the leaves, cut the leaves, put them underground. They do that. And they do that. And when you see those, there's a whole line of them. I didn't have time to look at all that kind of stuff. I got a little video of them going along, of the ants going along with their leaves in Costa Rica and taking all those and putting them underground. I'm like, wow, this is cool that they're farming fungus so that they can eat the fungus. And so that's what they do. And they take leaves off the trees in a kind of way it prunes the trees. And so the tree isn't damaged, the tree is actually helped. And that's kind of the way they are. Well, they work all summer. Of course, in Costa Rica, it's never not summer. They work all the time working on that. Here, in our part of the world, they work all summer so that they can survive the winter with the food that they prepare, that they save. And so we can learn a lot from that. You remember probably from either books or cartoons, and even Bug's Life, the movie that the kids watch. It's the grasshoppers are lazy and they're doing what they want to do, but the ants work all organized and whatever to getting their things together. Well, learn from the ant, Solomon says. Verse 10, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with a perverted heart devises evil, continually, sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing. One of the most well-known passages in Proverbs is the next few verses. Alan Webster, who is the preacher at the Jacksonville Church of Christ that does house to house, heart to heart, does a lot of the brochures that we have out there, has written a book, 7 Things a Loving God Hates, and it's about this text. And I have that book if you're interested in reading it, but it is 6 things, and of course it even says the 7th, but things that God hates. Even as a loving God. And he lists those here. 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are abomination to him. Haughty eyes, lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil. A false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. We could talk a week on each one of those. We won't. But there is a tremendous amount there. But take a look at those things. All of those things, if you look at them, are essentially the opposite of, the antithesis of the Beatitudes. When you look at it, you make a great sermon to compare the 7 things God hates and the Beatitudes, the things that God loves. You know, prideful, haughty eyes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. The opposite of that. Shedding innocent blood, being pure at heart, being a peacemaker, opposite of that. Devising wicked plans, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the exact opposite of that. And so all those things are very much the opposite of, like, say, the Beatitudes, the fruit of the Spirit, those kind of things. A lot of good things there to be concerned about and stay away from. The last of those is discord among brothers. There's very few things God hates more than that. Also, a lot of the 10 Commandments are wrapped up in those things that are there listed. Verse 20, he goes back to the subject of adultery, just in case you didn't get it. I mean, he really emphasizes this. He talked about it some in chapters 1 through 4, and he comes back to it here. Verse 20, my son, keep your father's command, and not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart, always tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and a teaching a light, and reproofs of discipline are a way of life, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of an adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. Can a man carry fire next to his chest, and his clothes not be burned? That's a very good description of lust, of holding fire to your chest. How can you hold that and not get burned? I mean, it makes sense. And of course, that's what he's using. Or can he walk on hot coals and not get his feet scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry. But if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all his goods to his house. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. He will get wounds and dishonor, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious. He will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation. He will refuse, though you multiply gifts. In other words, the jilted husband is going to be very upset about what happens there. And so, Solomon, like I said, as we have noticed, was very well aware of the damage that can happen. And he wanted to make sure his son, the reader of this, would know, don't go there. Don't even go near there, because of just look what can happen. What kind of damage you can do to your life and the lives of others if you get yourself there. You cannot play with fire and not get burned. That's what he's essentially saying. Any questions or comments? Okay. Go ahead. And we will, Lord willing, do chapter 7 and 8 next week.